the original saga was about the father, the children, and the grandchildren. And I mean, that's not a secret to anybody. It's even in the novels.
When Luke Skywalker was most vulnerable.
This is a dangerous time for you. It is you and your abilities the Emperor wants.
When a renegade hero became a friend in desperate need. And a dark villain faced his greatest challenge.
Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as father and son.
When the Empire turned more and more to the forces of the underworld.
Bounty hunters. We don't need that scum.
The underworld moved in to crush the Empire and the Rebellion in a single stroke. After The Empire Strikes Back and before Return of the Jedi, there was a time when heroes and villains alike lived in the shadows of the Empire.
Shadows of the Empire was a multimedia project created by Lucasfilm in 1996. Unlike previous tales which took place in the past or future, Shadows was seamlessly woven into the fabric of the original trilogy. The seeds of the project were planted years earlier, during a meeting between Lucasfilm Publishing director Lucy Wilson and Lou Aronica from Bantam Spectra, also partly responsible for the creation of the real sequel trilogy, who both decided that Star Wars was the perfect property to undertake a multimedia event with one storyline going through different product categories. The idea was to explore all commercial possibilities of a full motion picture release without actually making a film. Often referred to as the movie without a movie, this was largely meant to reinvigorate the franchise ahead of the prequel trilogy, which was originally planned for 1997, and also the special editions being released that same year.
For an entire generation, people have experienced Star Wars the only way it's been possible, on the TV screen. But if you've only seen it this way, you haven't seen it at all. On February 14th, Star Wars, followed soon after by The Empire Strikes Back, and then Return of the Jedi. The Star Wars Trilogy, Special Edition. See it again for the first time.
Several products were released, including a novel, a junior novelization, a 6-issue comic book series, a video game, a soundtrack, trading cards, role-playing games, posters, model kits, micro machines, and action figures.
All new adventures and all new wonders enthrall you in the best-selling Star Wars novels. Follow all the characters you love as the adventures continue. Read a Star Wars novel today, and the Force will be with you. Don't miss the Star Wars novel, Shadows of the Empire. Available in paperback, wherever books are sold.
Prepare yourself for Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire. The evil Empire has struck back with a vengeance, and a new villain, the crime lord Shizor, schemes to replace Darth Vader as the Emperor's second-in-command. With Han Solo held frozen in carbonite by bounty hunter Boba Fett, it's the Rebellion's darkest hour. Now, join Jedi warrior Luke Skywalker, hard-charging Chewbacca, and go undercover with heroic pilot Dash Rendar and his booming Outrider. But can Han Solo be freed and Shizor be stopped? Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire. Look for the authentic figures and vehicles from Kenner. The cruel crime lord Shizor directs the carbonite capture of Han Solo and his imprisonment aboard bounty hunter Boba Fett's battle-ready Slave One. Now, Luke Skywalker goes undercover with Soldier of Fortune Dash Rendar as he rips through space in his battle-transforming Outrider. But can they stop Slave One in time? It's the ultimate ships for the ultimate battle. Dare to enter the shadows. Star Wars, Shadows of the Empire. Figures and vehicles each sold separately.
So the anchors of the project were the novel, comic, and video game, which all corresponding merchandise would stem from. The novel dealt mostly with the rebel and imperial struggles. The comic covered Boba Fett and the other bounty hunters' involvement in the story, and the video game focused on Dash Rendar's adventures. Together, they gave a better understanding of how events were unfolding in the different parts of the Shadow timeline. The most commercial product in the Shadows of the Empire line, the game was first released in December 1996 as an exclusive N64 title.
I've seen 360 degrees of tomorrow, and for once, live to tell about it, because I've got the ultimate fighting machine.
Originally, Shadows was to take place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, but game designer John Knowles, who previously worked on TIE Fighter and Dark Forces, suggested that there was more dramatic possibilities between The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, with which Lucasfilm agreed to the premise, and it was also approved by George Lucas himself. This gave them opportunities to explain things that George only alluded to in the movies. George's biggest input to the project was that it should include an organised crime syndicate, which he wanted to be a believably structured underworld, that it should be as grounded in reality as possible. After fine-tuning the story elements, creative discussions began at Skywalker Ranch in November 1994 between Lucasfilm and the many licensees, including author Steve Perry, who was commissioned on behalf of Bantam Books.
She took the midnight train going anyway.
Note that, Steve Perry. Perry performed secretarial duties, taking notes of the freewheeling discussion that would inspire the basic storyline. Perry supplied a 25-page outline that became the backbone of the project. Response to the outline was enthusiastic, with editor Tom Dupree saying, "We'll sit back now and let you do the heavy lifting." Steve Perry was also a consultant for the 6-issue comic book series. While the stories in the book and comic seldom intersected, it was necessary that characters, scenes and dialogue match when they did come together. For Lucasfilm titles, continuity was a must, and depictions of the original trilogy cast had to maintain a resemblance to the actors, which proved challenging for comic book artist Killian Plunkett, who had a hard time drawing Darth Vader. Lucasfilm art director Doug Chiang provided designs for characters Dash Rendar and Shizor's ships. During the project, he had also begun work as production designer for the prequel movies. Originally envisioned for Timothy Zahn's Thrawn novels, Lucasfilm commissioned an official soundtrack composed by Joel McNeely, who previously worked on the Young Indiana Jones series, and performed by the Royal Scottish National Orchestra and Choir. Inspirational references for McNeely were original concept paintings from Ralph McQuarrie, and he was also free to concentrate on the musical visions he would conjure from the source material of the novel.
We'd sit there and bounce around ideas, and then we'd have these big story group meetings with the games people, Valentine editorial, like everybody kind of like working through what we were going to do. And then somehow I managed to make that deal with the soundtrack. I even went to Scotland when they were recording it. Of course, I got in trouble for that later because John Williams was really unhappy that I licensed someone else to do the music. That was the last, I tried doing more stuff with music, but I got my hand slapped and I couldn't.
She recalled, "I thought Joel did a great job. It just turned out to be a sensitive issue." Please listen as author Steve Perry recollects his experience with the project.
The way I got the job was because I'd written a novelization of a movie for Bantam Books. Tom Dupree was my editor, and he said, "Look, I got this deal. I got a movie novelization, and I got to get in a hurry. I need it fast." He was asking me a favor, and I said, what's the project? So it's The Mask, Jim Carrey. So I did it fast. In fact, I think it was one of the fastest novelizations I'd ever done. It took me like 18 days or something like that. And so I got it done and sent in. He said, "Okay, I owe you one." What he gave me was Star Wars Shadows of the Empire.
And they called and said, "Come on to the ranch." This was back when they were still at the ranch. "And we'll have a discussion." And what we did was I went into a room with 15 or 20 other people sitting around a great big table. They showed me the promo they had made, which was cut from bits and pieces of other movies. And they had a couple of characters and a general idea of they wanted to do a story set in a kind of an edgier, darker universe than sort of the Star Wars underground, basically the mafia in the Star Wars universe. And we sat and took notes, and we went around the table because it was a multimedia project, and so the games guy said, "Okay, we need this." The computer games guy said, "Okay, I want to have a scene with the sky cycles and motorcycles, we got to have that." So I'm taking notes. And the comic book people said, we want to have this character.
We want the Mandalorian. We want to have Boba Fett. And so, yeah, I can understand why. Sure, I basically been right about Boba Fett because I knew the comic book people were going to do it. I didn't really have anything to do with the games. It was all mine was the writing stuff. And so I talked to the people at Dark Horse who were working on the project. And I just basically said, well, you got a question, run it past me, and I'll compare it to what I'm doing in the book, and we won't get crosswise. They had Shizor as the villain. Now, Lucy Wilson came up with the name Shizor because it's sort of loosely based on, I guess she had a boyfriend at one point who was Portuguese. And so the pronunciation of that XI is SH. And so they had the villain. We knew what he looked like. They had some of the ships already laid out, but there really was no story. We sort of knew vaguely who these people were and of course, the existing character.
And any movie without Han Solo in it, it's not going to be as good as it could be because he's a rogue. He's an interesting character. They wouldn't let us, we couldn't use him because he was frozen. He was in carbonite, but we could come up with basically Han Solo's younger, cockier brother, and that's who Dash Rendar was.
Dash Rendar basically is the stand-in for Han Solo.
When I got done, everybody was pretty much happy with what they put in. I went home and wrote a big fat outline and sent it back in, and after it was approved, they went through and looked at all the different stuff. That was the basis for everything else that came.
I had a fan send me a note saying, I've been keeping track of all this stuff. I know where all the planets are and how many people were there. Would you be interested in reading it? And I said, oh, yes. And so he sent me a copy of the thing in an ASCII file. That's how long ago it was. And I read this thing. I thought, this is wonderful. So I called up Lucasfilm, Lucy Wilson, and the crew that I was working with there. And I said, you need to read this because this guy's got all this. And they did. And they read it and they bought it. And it became the basis for their Star Wars, map, basically, of where the planets were and all. You could just make stuff up because you didn't have to know anything. You didn't have to. Well, I'll just make up a new system. I don't have to worry about something that's already out there and screwing it up.
It's actually been claimed over the years that George Lucas remarked that he would have liked to have made The Shadows of the Empire into a film back in the 80s if it had been conceived then. Steve Perry also received a note from George that said, "Great job, love the work." The Secrets of Shadow of the Empire is a reference book, structured like a making-of book for a film. It covers the Shadows of the Empire multimedia campaign. Using this source book, I'd like to share a handful of quotes that cement the story and the EU in general as official canon. Continuity has been the supreme commandment at Lucasfilm for Shadows and all its Star Wars projects. The company has made the decision not only to keep expanding its mythic universe, but to have it unfold as a seamless chronicle. Whether a new star system is explored in a novel, or a scene from an ancient Jedi days is set in a comic series, nothing can contradict the history or logic of what has gone before. To keep it all straight, there is the canon, a timeline of major events and the lifespan of characters prepared by the continuity editors at Lucasfilm, and considered the in-house Bible of the Star Wars universe. When further reference is needed, there are also stacks of binders listing everything from starship blueprints to the biographies of characters. Archival resources include all the painstakingly preserved movie props, models, costumes, and production art. All of it, from the Bible to the treasures of the Lucasfilm archives, is located on the grounds of the famed Skywalker Ranch. This eye towards history and the instinct of preservation has been matched by the intellectual effort at maintaining continuity for a mythic saga that annually grows beyond the perimeters of the original movie trilogy. To keep track of the history of the universe, in 1992, Sue Rostoni began preparing a written chronology of events, from famous battles to the lifespans of characters, which, as long as the universe keeps expanding, is an ongoing process. By 1994, Alan Kosh had begun translating the chronology into a visual reference, a taped-together scroll of 11 by 17-inch pieces of paper that unrolled to 3 feet in length and was marked with a horizontal timeline drawn across and inscribed underneath with historical events. We have what we call canon, which is the screenplays, novelizations, and other core works that are directly tied into the continuity. And then there are a lot of marginal things, like the old Marvel comic series, that we don't really try to work into the continuity when we're planning new projects. Even the LucasArts interactive games have a premise, a backstory with player characters that we're trying to tie into overall continuity. It is sort of a godlike undertaking. We are creating this universe as we go along, but somebody has to keep his finger on everything that came before. Unlike those rudderless days with Marvel, the Dark Horse Star Wars titles would be tied directly into the overall continuity of the expanding universe. The West End Games offer for the Shadows of the Empire guidebook and Star Wars Adventure Journal stated, "We've expanded the universe." Despite the creative freedom within a game context, West End sourcebooks and game guidelines can't establish characters or situations that violate the saga's overall continuity. Lucy Wilson says, Shadows of the Empire had ultimately opened up new creative territory in the ever-expanding Star Wars universe, adding new characters, places, and vehicles to be accounted for in the Lucasfilm canon. Like others that worked for Lucasfilm prior to the 2012 sale, Perry has since claimed that the EU was never canon, but I'd like to show you some clips that show that he understood that it was.
You write something and it becomes part of the canon, and before Disney took it over, canon was different. And so they said, no, you can't do this because somebody in one of the books said this and we're stuck with it. So, okay, fine, I can understand that that's what it is.
They actually mentioned it in the show, and that brought me back into canon because otherwise I'm a legend writer. Shadows is a legend story, although they're starting to bring pieces of it back into the thing. So I'll eventually get back to canon status.
As writers came along, as the series progressed, as the books came along, we were all given a CD, which was basically a compendium of everything that we knew about Star Wars that we could use and what we couldn't use. And you had to use that as the background. They call it the holocron.
So if you had any questions about anything in Star Wars, you just call up Leland Cheek. He knew.
Leland Cheek was my continuity guy. He knew all the stuff about that. And so if I had a question, there was a problem, if I wrote something down, Leland would catch it, and he would come back and say, okay, here's the problem. Okay, good. I can do that. I can fix it. I'm not going to mess up anything.
But the fact is that, Lucas creates this great toy and lets us play with it. And of course, there's some strictures. There's some things you can't do. That's questions that any fan would ask when you're watching a movie. What are you thinking? What's going on in your head? Why are you doing this stuff? And I got to answer those questions. And it's like, how cool is that?
So Shizor is our main antagonist of the story. His species are called Feline, and he's reptilian and coolly calculating. He's also known as the Dark Prince and the Underlord of Black Sun, which is the largest criminal organization in the galaxy. We're told that Shizor is over 100 years old, although he only looks about 30. He exudes pheromones to make himself instantly attractive and irresistible. He has personal reasons to detest Vader, who he rivals for the Emperor's favour. Shizor knows that Darth Vader dislikes him enough to want him dead. To defeat Vader, Shizor puts a bounty out on Luke Skywalker, because his death would make it look like Vader had disobeyed the Emperor. So to locate Luke, he's going to use Leia, and he has some other plans in mind for her, but we'll get into that later. He eats a pear-like fruit called a moon glow, and if not prepared right, it could poison and kill you. And so he likens that to the thrill of the contest with Vader. His ship is called the Virago. We are introduced to Guri, who is described as flawless and beautiful, and she is Shizor's assassin. She's also a human replica droid, but she could pass as a real woman in virtually every way, to the point that 3PO can't place her accent or planet of origin. According to the scanner, her skin was only 10 years old, and her ship's called the Stinger. Shizor is aware that Skywalker had been Vader's name. He also thinks that Vader has no intention of killing Luke Skywalker. Vader thinks that Shizor can't be trusted, that whatever he's doing is only to benefit himself. Anakin had been much like Luke is now, mere potential. Vader reveals that the duel with Luke had made him feel, which was not a normal occurrence. He actually had pride that his worthy opponent was his own son. In fact, Vader had not purged all of Anakin Skywalker. He had been unable to eradicate him so that he could give himself fully to the dark side. Some part of Anakin still existed in him despite all that he had done. There's a really cool part where Vader duels a training droid, and it's built to his personal specifications which held a lightsaber which mastered different fighting skills. Vader actually learns of Shizor's plans to kill Luke Skywalker and embarrass him in front of the Emperor, learning that Shizor's competition with him was personal, because Vader had been in charge of an Imperial biological project that was responsible for the death of Shizor's family. The man who had been Senator Palpatine. Shizor describes the Emperor as a walking corpse, a mummified body. Extensive use of the dark side had eaten away at the Emperor physically. The Emperor was a poor loser. He actually had someone killed who left him to work for Shizor. The Emperor enjoyed seeing Shizor and Darth Vader pit against each other. He liked to crack the whip every now and then just to show that he still held it. It's revealed that the Emperor was not so powerful as to be able to read thoughts. The Emperor actually allowed the Death Star plans to fall into the hands of the Bothans. Leia dreams about Han being frozen. Chewie has a life debt to Han, so he refuses to leave Leia's side until Han can tell him otherwise. Leia has actually noticed Han and Luke competing for her affection. A lesser man would have taken advantage of a rival's absence, but Luke hadn't. He wanted to find Han just as much as she did. Obviously, they don't know they're brother and sister yet. Leia actually wants Lando to put her in contact with Black Sun's spy net to discover who is after Luke. His contact was a Rodian named Avaro, whose nephew had been Greedo. The Bothans had uncovered information vital to the Alliance. Goody gives Leia the Bosch disguise, which is seen in Return of the Jedi. Bosch was killed after trying to get more credits from an agreed contract. Chewie was also disguised as a bounty hunter called Snuva. He's got like a mohawk and it's all dyed and stuff. Right, so Leia meets Shizor and she thinks he's gorgeous. Chewbacca was unaffected by the pheromones, but they had a grasp of Leia. She felt drawn to him. Shizor kisses her and she can't fight the temptation. Chewbacca interrupts them. He knows something's a threat to her. Leia realises she's under some sort of influence to be behaving this way, so she kicks Shizor between the legs. I read that fans weren't too fond of this when it came out, the whole Shizor and Leia thing. Steve Perry does give excuses for it, kind of pushes the blame a little bit, but I don't know, it's pretty descriptive. It's a bit sus.
I really got hate mail when people were unhappy that Princess Leia might betray Han Solo because of this Feline's pheromones. I said, yeah, but not to spoil it or anything, she didn't. You know, it's she needs him in the crotch. I mean, that's.
As well as the disguise, Leia also learns how to use a thermal detonator, and she puts one in her bag for later. It says the climate on Tatooine would leach you dry if you stayed out in it unprotected for too long. And also the Tusken Raiders kept clear of Obi-Wan's hut. So if you've seen my last video, that'll really benefit you. Luke has actually started constructing a new lightsaber with instructions found at Ben Kenobi's hut. We find him cooking a lightsaber gem. Ben's trunk contained a book with instructions on how to build this lightsaber. Luke actually gets phantom limb pain in his robotic hand whenever he thinks of Darth Vader. There's a part later on where they're in a battle and Obi-Wan warns Luke through the Force, which helps him avoid being blasted from behind. Someone had programmed the astromech on another X-Wing to shoot at him. Another character we'll talk about in a bit actually leaves him for dead, and Luke is very angry about this. But we're reminded that Obi-Wan had warned him that he could not give in to his anger. If he did, the dark side would claim him. He would feel the bleak, unclean energy that would give him the ability to bring this character to his knees with a gesture. To give in to the dark side would be to become like Darth Vader and the Emperor, which he fought against. Upon completing his lightsaber, Luke can hear the swoop bikes driven by the swoop gangs. They actually are utilised in the special edition of A New Hope as well. It's revealed that the Bothans are trying to obtain an Imperial computer being transported incognito on a freighter carrying fertilizer. Later on, Luke practices his levitation. He actually manages to hover a few centimetres off the ground. Luke's potential was larger than the Emperor and Vader. He also uses a Jedi mind trick to escape his cell. The Force tells Luke that Leia is in danger. In order to save Leia, Luke and Lando disguise themselves as elite stormtroopers. Lando explains that certain parts of Coruscant, which is now the centre of the Imperials, is actually worse than Mos Eisley. Luke connects with Leia telepathically. For their getaway plan, Luke tells the droids to pilot the Falcon. This is actually pretty comical. You hear the droids through the comlink flying the ship poorly. Dash Rendar, freelance cargo delivery. He informs Lando where Boba Fett is on the planet Gaul. It's also revealed that he took down an Imperial walker on Hoth while delivering cargo. His ship is called the Outrider, and he has a droid called Lebo. Dash was a great pilot. Chewie said he must be part bird. When they spot Boba Fett's ship, Dash leaves, saying that he was paid to guide, not shoot. So that ties back into when I was talking about Luke being angry at someone. Dash was actually at the Imperial Academy 1 year behind Han. The Emperor had banished his family from Coruscant for accidentally damaging his private museum. Luke says that Dash was so full of himself it's a wonder he didn't spew ego all over the place. Dash gets pretty upset later when he fails to blow up a missile that kills a bunch of Bothans. That's how the many Bothans died to secure the vessel and cargo. There's a lot of talk of this freighter trick. It's basically when you sneak under the belly of another freighter and you kind of use it to disguise yourself to get through the sensor shields. Unfortunately, Dash Rendar is killed from debris from Shizor's ship after Darth Vader destroys him. But if you are a video gamer, the Shadows of the Empire game has an alternate ending where Dash and Lebo basically fly off into the galaxy.
Captain, I do not understand. Why do you not want Commander Skywalker and the others to know that we survived and made the jump to hyperspace?
Well, as much fun as that was, I don't see us joining the ranks of that crazy rebellion. Too dangerous and too much money to be made elsewhere, my friend. On top of that, someone from Black Sun will take Shizor's place. And when that happens, you can bet your servo motors they'll send every thug in the galaxy after us. But if everyone thinks we're dead, who's going to be looking? Besides, it's good to be remembered as a martyr without actually having to be dead, wouldn't you say?
Luke hints at his plan to save Han. It says he was not a master yet, but he was a Jedi Knight, and that was enough for now. Luke then records his negotiation message for Jabba. Those were my highlights, but what did I think of the book? Well, long story short, I liked it. I liked it a lot. It fits in really well between the movies, which is what it's supposed to do. But unfortunately, I actually found the story behind the multimedia project more fascinating than reading the actual story. As much as it has loads of good tie-ins and stuff like that, I found it kind of difficult to read in parts. And I don't say this to be patronising or snobby. It's just some of it was a little bit tedious to get through. And the only other thing I really disliked was all the stuff with Shizor and Leia. I know that's like a cliche thing to say when it comes to this book, but it really could have been trimmed down a bit, or at least less descriptive. I don't know what Steve Perry was thinking when he wrote that, or even the licensing to let it get through editing. I don't know. As always, keep reading your EU, keep the real canon alive, and lang may your lum reek.
I've kind of lost control of Star Wars, so it's going off in a different path than what I intended. But the first 6 are very much mine and my philosophy. And I think that philosophy sort of goes beyond any particular time, because it's based on history, it's based on philosophy, it's based on a lot of things.